And the last thing I wanted to just bring up is an update on this Department of Justice. I use that term loosely these days. Lawsuit against Apple. And I mean, look, dude, the more I look into this, the more I'm like, what is the actual problem? Like, there are real problems, I think, that probably need to be addressed. But they're accusing Apple of being a monopoly, and I don't actually think that's a real problem. And when I was reading through some of the details of this story, some of the accusations from the DOJ I just thought were odd. Like, first of all, the DOJ states that Microsoft, HTC, and LG all exited the smartphone market because of Apple. And they make that sound like it's a bad thing. I'm like, well, that's because Apple is just so good. You know, it's not like Apple did something nefarious to force them out or illegal. It's like they're just that good. You could say that about other game consoles too. Like, where's Atari these days? I don't know. It's probably because Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo are so good. Let's see here. Just this week, the DOJ announced it would be suing Apple. Yeah, we already know all that. In the court documents, when trying to substantiate the damage done by Apple's market practices, it claims many prominent, well-financed companies have tried and failed to successfully enter the relevant markets because of these entry barriers. Okay. When looking at specific failures, the DOJ cites, you're going to love this, the DOJ cites Amazon, which released its Fire Phone in 2014 but could not profitably sustain its business and exited the following year. They're going to blame the failure of Fire Phone, Amazon Fire Phone, on Apple.
Have any of those justices actually used the Fire Phone?
No one used the Fire Phone. That was the problem.
If the Fire Phone was the only smartphone, it still would have failed.
I never got my hands on one. Is it terrible?
Nobody did, Lewis. That's the problem. That's why they went out of business. I mean,
well, but see, that's what these numbnuts over the DOJ are saying. Well, Apple, just so dominant that even Amazon can't make a phone.
The suit claims that the entry barriers are so high that Google is a distant third to Apple and Samsung, despite the fact that Google controls the development of the Android operating system. They use this as evidence as that Apple's doing something wrong, and to me, this is evidence that they're doing something so well that no one can compete. Like, let's not forget when the iPhone came out, people were using, as Steve Bomber liked to say, Nokia phones and BlackBerry. They were completely dominant. The iPhone was so dang good, it put those two companies out of business. And BlackBerries were ubiquitous. They were what was used everywhere. And Apple was so good that it completely bankrupted them. So, I mean, the walled garden and the ecosystem approach that Apple has, I mean, yeah, it's definitely annoying sometimes. But I don't see how they classify it as a monopoly when you can just not buy it. I mean, a monopoly is something that you're forced to buy. It's like your water or your electricity. Like, you don't have multiple providers. But if you want, there's like a zillion different phones that you could buy and not participate. Now, I think there's an argument that there's a duopoly. I think obviously that's true. You're either going to be in Google's ecosystem or Apple's. But I don't know what other options there are. I mean, people want to use the best OS, and those are kind of the two best. I mean, what else are you supposed to do? It's not like there aren't other phone companies that come out that make products and end up not being popular. I mean, Microsoft tried, and they exited too. They had their own operating system, and they left the ecosystem. And it's not because Apple is so tightly integrated with other Apple hardware, which I think is kind of like a premise of the DOJ's claims that is one of the reasons why they're suing. They're like, well, the Apple Watch should work better with Android devices. Why? Why should Apple make their watch work with every other the zillion Android products that are out there? It's like, why can't they make their own products work well with their own products? Like, that's what every company on earth does. Like the best controllers for Xbox are made by Microsoft. The best controllers for PlayStation are made by PlayStation. I mean, or Sony. Like, why should Apple do things any differently? I just think this whole suit is very bizarre. And I kind of wonder if it's actually going to go anywhere. But, I mean, I think it could end up just being like a cash grab or something, like they'll levy fines on Apple or something. I have no idea, but we'll continue following this story. I know a lot of you probably think this is boring. I kind of do too. But the more I read about it, the more I think there are some like entertaining aspects of this story. And You got the
Some
DOJ.
infuriating aspect.
Yeah, and some of those as well. Oh, and then I was just reading like the EU is like going after Apple to make sure they're complying with all their new regulations over there. And I was like, oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure your concern is all about to make sure that Apple's being compliant and not that if they're not compliant, you get to levy huge fees on them. Some people call me a cynic, Lewis. I think I'm just practical.